several months ago, we began to uncover some excessive spending at the Department of Veterans Affairs dealing with conferences. Some of those conferences were actually held in the state of Florida. $6.1 million ultimately was used to fund 2 conferences in Florida, of which there were several thousand VA employees that came to it. We found out ultimately that the total cost could have been as much as $9 million. So with that in mind, we began investigating. Some colleagues like Tim Huelskamp, who's here with us today from Kansas, who serves on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I began looking into conference spending. We began asking the Department of Veterans Affairs what their budget was for conferences. The first time VA talked to us, they said it was $20 million. Then we pushed them a little bit further because it sounded not very plausible that you could spend up to $9 million on 2 conferences in Florida and their entire budget was $20 million. We found out that the VA conference budget for 1 year is $100 million. $100 million. Money that should be going to the veterans of this country have been being used, unfortunately, for many, many years by the employees themselves at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Some of it are well-intended conferences, and I think it's important that we talk today about the fact that training is important. However, we're in a time fiscally in the United States of America where we can no longer do the things that we would like to do. We have to be able to pay for the things that we must do. And one of those things is providing for the health care of those that have worn the uniform of this country. Ultimately, as we began digging around, we also found out that the Department of Veterans Affairs held the Golden Games in Hawaii. Millions of dollars were used in Hawaii to provide the Golden Games. And this is not an attack on the Golden Games either, but it is in fact the amount of money that was spent, the number of VA employees that participated and benefited from really this VA boondoggle, if you will, for the employees, when the next Golden Games that are going to be held are going to be in Buffalo, New York. So I come here today to say that unfortunately there is this culture within VA that if they don't spend the money, they're not going to get it again. And I think what we're finding now is a complete waste of dollars on this Hawaii trip. We're finding out now that actually the Undersecretary of Veterans Affairs at the time participated not only in the planning of this multi-million-dollar event in Hawaii, which I understand was her home state, but she was there as well. And I think that the American public deserves answers. And so I'm here today to say that the House of Representatives will in fact be holding hearings on the entire conference debacle. The Department of Veterans Affairs has been less than forthcoming with bringing information forward to us that I have been asking for time and time again. So after next week, when hopefully the political time subsides somewhat, we can get back to doing the work that needs to be done and the proper oversight by the Congress. I will say that, you know, the United States Congress, whether it is a Republican Congress, whether it's a Democrat Congress, has not done their oversight role appropriately. And because our committee has in fact stepped up over the last 2 years, we began to uncover some of the things that I bring to you today. So what I'd like to do is introduce Tim Huelskamp from Kansas to come forward and talk about some of the information that he in fact has uncovered as well. Tim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your hard work as chairman of the committee. My name is Tim Huelskamp. I come from the state of Kansas, and this is my freshman term in Congress. And what we have uncovered and are still continuing to try and uncover is in one word, is outrageous. The mismanagement at the VA. culture of overspending, of wasteful spending is outrageous. Not to those of us just as committee members, but the fact the mission of the VA is to serve the veterans. And we found out in these conferences, at least the initial information we've received, and I'll note, it has been extraordinarily difficult to get information out, whether it's the undersecretary or the secretary. We have had initial hearings. I sent a letter on August 14th and said, identify where you spent the money. This is taxpayer money. No response, no answer. 15 unanswered questions, and particularly the Golden Games situation. We estimate on publicly available data was not provided directly by the VA, but provided generally by the federal government, over $2.5 million of spending. And certainly the Golden Games is a tremendous opportunity for veterans. I have 9 uncles in my family that have served as veterans. Tens and thousands of veterans in my district, and many of them participated in the Golden Games. But it didn't have to cost $2.5 million. It didn't have to be in Hawaii, which is inaccessible to most veterans. In order to participate in the Golden Games, the veterans pay for the travel and they pay for the hotel room. The $2.5 million that was spent, including $1 million for an event planner based in Alaska, just outrageous. Why did you need an event planner, Ms. Undersecretary, who was involved in this planning? No answers, no response. And usually if you fail to respond, the answer is probably worse than we could figure. And so we're going to continue to dig on that. $2.5 million. A few years before that, we had the Golden Games in Topeka, Kansas. And near as we could tell, the price tag is a third of what it was to send some bureaucrats to what looks like a very luxurious vacation. And I think it's outrageous. It's outrageous. It's not for, again, the taxpayers to fund these types of conferences, but it's putting the bureaucracy before the veterans. I think there's been a pattern in this administration, particularly with the undersecretary that was involved in the planning of this. This is the same pattern I believe we've seen occur at the state level, in which bureaucracies and politics were put before the veterans. And this committee has always been told to me as a freshman, this is the most bipartisan, the most nonpartisan committee. And I'll tell you, both Republicans and Democrats are outraged at the wasteful spending, the mismanagement, the failure to actually come clean. What are you trying to hide that you can't answer basic budget questions? Why did you need $500,000 to put bureaucrats up in hotel rooms, and not veterans, but to provide hotel rooms for bureaucrats to come to these Golden Games in Hawaii? Those are the unanswered questions. And as the chairman indicated, we will continue to look into those no matter what happens on November 6th and what happens, because our veterans deserve the best care they can get. They deserve the top care, not the last care that would come out of the VA. So it's a pleasure to visit with you and share with you some information that is very critical, and it's outrageous to see the type of responses we've seen out of the VA for a very critical issue. And with that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Joe Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. Thanks, Congressman Huelskamp. Let me read just a brief statement. As you've heard from Chairman Miller and Congressman Huelskamp, Ms. Duckworth has had at best a failed career as a bureaucrat, both at the Illinois VA, and we've outlined in depth her record at the Illinois VA and at the federal VA. And the Hawaii trip that Congressman Huelskamp alluded to, Ms. Duckworth planned. Her tenure at both of these positions deserves to be examined further, certainly before this election. But I feel of all the issues, including the wasting of taxpayer dollars and the using of her position for political gain, the one issue that has to be explained before this election is her decision to fire and threaten 2 whistleblowers, 2 VA employees. As Chairman Miller stated, the men and women who work every day at numerous VAs across Illinois and all the other states are dedicated, hard-working folks who have only one concern, and that's to help the veterans they serve. That was the case down at the Anna facility, where 2 employees at the VA saw things that were occurring at their VA that they did not think were right. Because their direct supervisor appeared to be part of the problem, these 2 women had the courage to go straight to the head of the Illinois VA at the time, Ms. Duckworth, and let her know what was happening. Upon receiving this information, what did Ms. Duckworth do? Did she say that I need to take a look at this immediately and remedy these problems so that our veterans are taken care of? No. Instead, Ms. Duckworth, in an unprecedented move, the head of the Illinois VA personally drove down to the facility in Anna and fired one of the women. She then publicly humiliated her and had her escorted out of the building by security. She then allegedly sat the other woman down and told her to keep her mouth shut if she wanted to keep her job. Those are not the actions of a person whose main priority was to take care of veterans. These were the actions of a person with an axe to grind, a personal vendetta. It is for that reason that these two brave women once again had the courage to stand up, and they filed a lawsuit against Ms. Duckworth and another defendant for what transpired. It was not until last month that I even became aware of this lawsuit. Upon learning of the lawsuit, I believed that this was a matter Ms. Duckworth should explain to voters. So during a recent debate, I asked her why she abused her power and why did she fire and threaten two whistleblowers. What was her response? She denied that there was a case against her on two separate occasions. She denied that she was currently being sued by two VA employees. In front of 1,000 people at the debate and everybody listening and watching, she lied and said there was no lawsuit. Why was that not a story? An hour later, after the debate, when she realized that she could no longer lie and say there was no lawsuit, Ms. Duckworth changed her tune. She said this time, when asked about the lawsuit at the press conference, she said she was not involved in the case and was simply added as a defendant because she was the head of the agency. Yet, based on the court filings, it was clear that according to the defendants, it was Ms. Duckworth's personal and direct actions that led to the lawsuit. It was not as she claimed. She lied again for the second time. Why was this not a story? However, it wasn't, and I'm almost done, until last week or so that we learned about an internal email at the VA that clearly showed not only was Ms. Duckworth directly involved in the firing of a whistleblower, but now we know that days later she realized she had, in her own words, screwed up by firing one of the women. According to the email that Ms. Duckworth sent her team at the VA just days after firing Ms. Butler, Ms. Duckworth acknowledges that she screwed up, and she asks her team to come up with clear reasons to justify why she should fire Ms. Butler. Apparently, Ms. Duckworth didn't understand that you can't fire someone for no reason. She realized that in order to fire Ms. Butler, she was going to have to come up with a reason or just make one up so that she could cover her tracks. Why isn't this email a story? Once again, these are not the actions of a person who wants to help veterans. Yet, despite the actions she's taken in this case, we're 5 days before an election, and Ms. Duckworth refuses to answer these questions of why she fired the whistleblower. To this day, she not only refuses to explain her behavior, she's still denying she had any role in the incident. With just 5 days to go before voters go to the polls, on behalf of the residents of the 8th District, I demand that Ms. Duckworth explain her actions. Why is she currently being sued by two VA employees? Why did she lie and say she was never being sued? And please explain the email when she acknowledged she messed up and she's tried to cover up her tracks. Let me close with this, folks. You know I've been put through the ringer in this campaign. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of media coverage of a personal lawsuit that I had to endure that was dismissed last April. Ms. Duckworth, a candidate for Congress, 5 days before an election, is currently being sued by two VA employees, a suit she's lied about, a suit where we now have evidence she's tried to cover up. Why in God's name is that not a story? Let me close there, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about any of the topics covered.
Is this second VA employee still with the VA?
My understanding is she is. Yes.
Congressman, it's a busy time for you both. Why come in now to speak on behalf of Congressman Walsh?
Actually, I have been in the area for a couple of days. I have actually been trying to come up here to get my schedule to where it would work with Congressman Walsh's schedule, and this worked out. I'll leave and head back to Florida this afternoon. We have an election back there as well, and so I would say this. Members of Congress are known by the work that they do when they're in Washington. And I've heard that there have been challenges thrown at Congressman Walsh about not supporting the veterans. And although he's not on our committee, I will tell you this. Most of the major pieces of legislation that we passed this year, in a bipartisan fashion, I'll add, Joe Walsh was involved in. One of the things that's most important to getting veterans rehired is the certification process that veterans have to go through when they return from Iraq and Afghanistan. And most of that's at the state and local level. And so the bills that we have passed and Joe has supported have all been focused on getting veterans back to work, providing better and more timely health care for our veteran communities, and making sure that the Department of Veterans Affairs works efficiently. It is the second largest agency in the federal government. Over 300,000 employees and a budget of $140 billion on an annual basis. We have to do our job of oversight, making sure that the leadership at the VA is doing the job that they're supposed to do, and things like the Golden Games, the other conferences around the VA. Not only will we be having hearings, but because of VA's lack of transparency in providing us the necessary information, we will be subpoenaing, which is not a customary thing to do for the Department of Veterans Affairs, their records on all conferences across the United States in an effort to have complete openness and find out where the money's going and how it's being spent and why it's not being spent for veterans and their health care, why it's being spent on the bureaucracy instead of the veterans.
Will you call on Ms. Duckworth to testify before the committee on some of these questions?
If her name shows up in the subpoena, I fully expect that she will be called as a witness. You know, as I said early on, the VA committee has been a very bipartisan committee. We don't usually swear in our witnesses. We expect truthful testimony when it's told. We expect answers to be given to us in a timely fashion, and that has not happened. And when that occurs, especially on the conference spending, I feel that it's incumbent upon me as the chairman on behalf of the American public to do what needs to be done. And that is to call those that are involved for testimony, to swear them in at the committee, and if necessary, and I believe it is, we will subpoena all records involving all the conferences the VA has been involved in.
America's veterans deserve answers, and America's taxpayers deserve answers. I would rather not have to be here, and there's a very simple way to avoid that, and that's to have the administration, particularly the former undersecretary, come clean, provide the information. And I'm not familiar with the details of the whistleblower lawsuit, but it is outrageous that the American public has to rely on whistleblowers to find out what happens in the administration, whether it's the Illinois VA or the U.S. Department of VA. But we deserve those answers, and I will do everything I can to get to the bottom of them, whether it's the $2.5 million for the Golden Games that made it very difficult for veterans to participate, or it's the other $97.5 million, much of what apparently is wasted on conferences. Again, August 14th, I sent a letter, committee sent letters before and after that, still no responses. What are you trying to hide? I mean, is there something even worse than the figures we're finding out? I mean, are there other items there that would implicate Ms. Duckworth or other VA officials? This is very serious. It is a bipartisan committee. We expect answers, as the chairman indicated. They provided answers in the past, but here we sit today, having to come here, trying to get answers out of Ms. Duckworth and other folks that are running the VA. And that's I believe, tragic, just not for veterans, but for taxpayers as well.
Congressman Walsh, what was it?
Just one important note on that, and then I'll answer. It's important that when information on this Hawaii boondoggle trip first came up, Ms. Duckworth basically denied any involvement. It's become clear, and even she's had to acknowledge that she planned this trip to go back to Hawaii, her home state. Yes, sir.
What was it the whistleblowers initially didn't like that they saw?
There was campaign activity transpiring at the facility in Anna, a clear violation of Illinois election law on government property. This is the activity they reported to Ms. Duckworth. Ms. Duckworth, and I need to emphasize this again as well, when this activity was reported to Ms. Duckworth, she personally drove down to the facility, and as the head of the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs, personally fired one of the whistleblowers and had her removed from the building with security. Again, I'm not as experienced as these two. I find that move to be fairly unprecedented, that a mid-level, I don't even know if she was a mid-level employee, would be personally fired, and then allegedly threatened the other one and basically said, keep your mouth shut and you'll continue working here. Again, this is a current lawsuit. When this was put in front of her, you all know this, a month ago, what did she say? I'm not being sued. There's no current lawsuit. I find that startling.
She has since said that this woman is someone who routinely files lawsuits and that she's just litigious. That this is just another example of
So
that.
I trust that the Chicago Tribune is digging into this story with every resource they've got, right? Because you've known about this for a while. I just find that fascinating. I can tell you that if Congressman Joe Walsh was currently being sued by two former employees, I'll bet you dollars to donuts that would be front page news in the Chicago Tribune and the Daily Herald. Interesting thoughts and questions you might raise if someone's actually looking into the story.
Congressman, can you talk a little bit about Nancy Pelosi being in town to do some fundraising today?
I live in a bubble. I don't look, think, or act outside of this district. I've got 5 days, and it's my goal. We began 3 days ago campaigning from 6 in the morning till 9 at night, 15 hours a day. All I'm doing is trying to meet as many 8th District voters as I can. I think I still remember who Ms. Pelosi is, but I couldn't tell you the first thing about what she's doing.
But does that speak to how important Illinois is in this election and that she's here? They've said that, you know, the road to getting control of the House again is through Illinois.
She famously said last year that the path to her getting her hands on that gavel again were going to come right through Illinois. But I think a very funny thing's happened along the way. The people in Illinois are struggling every bit as much as people in all over the country are, and they're upset with the direction this country's going. They're concerned about keeping their job, keeping their home, and struggling to pay their bills. And I think that certainly my opponent, who does not spend much time in the 8th District, just doesn't get that. Anything else, folks?
What are your thoughts on whether the government should give a blank check to rebuilding from Hurricane Sandy?
Oh, gosh, I don't know, Jeff, you want to weigh in at all on that? Look, right now, we have this tendency in this country when tragic events happen to want to debate and argue, and again, per your question, my thoughts and prayers are just with the folks impacted by that horrific act of Mother Nature, and I haven't thought beyond that.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.